It's my honor and pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker of today, Bettany Hughes. Clearly, the University of the Future is a university that actively brings science and society together. And that is exactly what Bettany Hughes does. In her work, she shares fundamental research insights with a wider public. As a historian, author, and broadcaster, she has written and presented a number of books and documentaries for television. Examples are When the Moors Ruled Europe, Helen of Troy, and The Spartans. Her teledocumentaries have reached 100 million people worldwide already. Mrs. Hughes is a research fellow at King's College London. She is momentarily working on a book on Socrates. Bettany, we are curious what a historian, connoisseur of the past, has to say about the University for the Future. The title you chose for this keynote address, Ta Erotika, the Socratic future of education and of society, makes our curiosity even stronger. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to Bettany Hughes.
Thank you so much for that. I was delighted to hear in a session earlier this morning that when people look to the future, they generally use the left side of their brain, which is, of course, the mathematical, the management, the logical side of their brain. And I intend this afternoon, very briefly, to forget the left side and to use entirely the right side of my brain, because I'm going to be talking about the future as a subject of love, ta erotica. Just before I start, though, a couple of things. When I agreed to make this talk, and I was absolutely delighted and honoured to be asked to such a genuinely auspicious occasion, it was actually quite a straightforward thing for me to do. What I didn't realise was that this would be an incredibly controversial undertaking, because I'm sure, as some of you will have realised, Maastricht University has hit the British press in a big way. So I'm just trying to spool. Here we are. So the British press has been obsessed. I'll just tell you that it was very amusing for me because I was working in Oxford and I told people that I was coming to Maastricht, and it was as if I had suddenly slept with the enemy, because the way that Maastricht was being reported in the British press was as if you were somehow kidnapping these good British students, luring them over here in some kind of human trafficking. As you can see, the headlines in the British press were full of Maastricht, and this notion that you were somehow enticing our good British students to your foreign soils. So when I came over here, people, academic colleagues, very high academic colleagues, sort of subtly said to me, do you think you could just suss them out and see what Maastricht has got that we haven't got? So I'm not an undercover spy, and I will report back that there doesn't seem to be any kidnapping going on, as far as I can see. In fact, quite the opposite. What Maastricht is doing by embracing international students seems to be serving the absolute fundamental purpose of a university, which, of course, if you go back to the Latin derivation of the word universitas, means an embracement, a whole, a completeness. And that's what I think a university should be, and it's something I'm going to be talking about later today. But just before I start my speech proper, I just wanted to share a very brief anecdote with you. The introduction describing these 100 million people who've seen my television programmes, I always think it sort of makes me sound rather glamorous, and I just have to promise you that I am not remotely glamorous, nor is my life. I've just come back from a research trip to Siberia and Kazakhstan, the sort of borders of southern Siberia. Very, very interesting topic, because in the grass steppe lands there, I don't know, have any of you been to the steppes of Russia? Raise your hands if you have. A few, down here, okay. Well, you'll agree with me, it is the most extraordinary place. You land in a place called Chelyabinsk, and you look east, and for 7,000 miles, there is nothing other than flat grassland, and then you reach Japan. I mean, it is the most extraordinary place. And of course, during the Soviet era, no photographs, no aerial photographs were allowed to be taken. But then in 1989, one archaeologist managed to borrow a very old farm plane, and he went up and flew across the steppes. And what he saw amazed him, because down beneath him, there were not 10, not 20, not 30, not 40, but 70 spiral cities from the Bronze Age, each in the shape of a swastika. So he could see these shapes on the steppe grassland. So, of course, he came rushing down, made a phone call to Gorbachev, who agreed that this was a significant discovery, and the sites are now currently being excavated. Nobody will have heard of it because none of this material has yet been published. I'd gone to see it because the fact that these sites are in the shape of a swastika has meant that they've taken on a rather sinister political turn. Lots of neo-Nazis are going there. Vases from the sites have been dug up with the shape of a swastika on them. And again, people are going and kind of paying homage to these things as if this is where the Aryan master race has at last been found. So it's a very hot topic, a very hot area. And I conducted this research trip, and because it was so interesting, I thought I'd try to make a BBC radio documentary about it. And the BBC, as everywhere else in the world, has had cuts recently. So now when you're making a documentary, you are given the grand total of 2 working days to prepare and script your documentary before you go. So because I was concentrating on the political difficulties of this area, I hadn't thought practically at all about the fact that I was going to southern Siberia. And I suddenly, about 48 hours before I left, I suddenly thought, well, do I need special clothes? You know, I've got no idea. Is it freezing cold there? Is it boiling hot? So I rang up the producer who was supposed to be dealing with these matters and said, hello, can you just get back to me to let me know if there's anything special I should take? He said, okay, I'll get onto it. I'll ring you back. So the mobile phone went about an hour and a half later. It was a very bad line. And he said, Bettany, I'm afraid there's terrible news. You have to prepare yourself. The area that we're going to, it's a very bad line, I couldn't completely hear him properly. The area we're going to is infested with aggressive pigs. And we have to defend ourselves against these aggressive pigs. Well, you know, my mind was absolutely whirling. He said, so make sure have you got any leather trousers? I said, well, no, actually, I don't happen to have leather trousers. He said, well, find some leather boots. Anyway, so as I said, my mind was boggling. I put the phone down, went home, and I said, could you just send me an email to kind of clarify what kind of pigs these are and why they're so aggressive? So I got home, went online, looked at my emails, and the title of the email was Warning from the Foreign Office, Danger in the Region of Arcane, which is exactly where we're going. Scrolled down the email and it said, Arcane has recently been infested by a series of aggressive ticks, not pigs, but ticks. So I thought, oh, well, thank heavens, I was mishearing this. A tick, I can deal with. And then I carried on down the line. These ticks carry a viral form of encephalitis, and after contact, fatality is certain. So this producer had got onto something, but the idea of him with his spray, and then it said at the bottom, as long as you are healthy and fit and sound of limb, take your spray with you, you should be okay. So I thought, well, all right, he's got this covered. So I met him at Heathrow Airport, 4:30 the following morning, to see him walking into the airport with a broken arm and a broken leg because he'd broken these things rollerblading. What a grown-up man is doing rollerblading in the weekend, I don't know. And so was completely useless. So this notion I was going to be protected by this kind of brawny producer with his spray was hopeless. Anyway, we went, it was without incident. It was an incredibly interesting and eye-opening research trip. There were no ticks or pigs. I'm glad to say, for me, I'm a lifelong vegetarian, so what was a bit horrific is that we were given horse meat for breakfast every morning, but that was about as bad as it got. But as I said, a genuinely useful thing to do. But what is interesting, I think, about that trip to Siberia is that although I went for academic and professional reasons, actually what has stuck with me and what I'm doing now is telling you the story of what happened. And I think that this is key because stories, and this is the theme of my speech this afternoon, stories, and I think particularly those that cross linguistic and international boundaries, are arguably central to the future of impactful, sustainable, globally relevant education. If you think about it, we use stories to engage the whole time. When we sit round a table and have a family meal, when we meet friends in a bar, when we compose a beautiful piece of music, such as that we've just been listening to, when we create a painting, when we develop a university degree course, actually, what we are doing is creating a storybook version of reality, a version of reality that is going to touch another in some way. If you look at human society, as soon as we start to create plastic forms, what we do is we tell a story about ourselves. This is the famous Venus of Willendorf. Here are some cave paintings from Lascaux. These are beautiful Cycladic figurines from about 5000 BC. Now, I know as an archaeologist that all the societies that created those beautiful works of art were actually capable of a very literal, figurative representation of the human form. They could have created something that looked like a Dutch Renaissance still life. They actually could physically have created something that looked like a model in a shop window. But they chose not to do that. They chose to create a form of humanity that in some way told a story about itself. So you might ask, how is all this relevant to the university of the 21st century? And what I'd like to propose very briefly today is that the 21st century equivalent of this kind of storytelling, the way that we interpret the world, the anecdotes that we tell about it, and therefore the attitude that we develop towards our place in human society, as well as the tools that we use to share our ideas, is not a job, but the job of the human experience best served by the university of the future. Arguably, you might think, I know I'm going to need to convince you a bit with this, but you might think that for an immensely forward-looking university such as Maastricht, which interestingly is the narrative that is developing around Maastricht, both internally and externally, that something like this, we've lost it, but if we can just have a look again at my figurine. Yeah, so something like this, you would think, in a way, is beautiful but remote, completely irrelevant. But I think that although we should never live in the past, we are fools if we do not admit that we live with it, that we do not admit that we live as we do today because we live as a result of a collective human experience which has been carrying on in a civilized form for the last 6,000 years. I think perhaps also the reason I was invited to speak to you today is because I have made it my business to communicate the human experience via narratives that have relevance across international boundaries in a mixture of both the oral and the visual in a medium that is delivered on whatever is the most widely used and the latest technology of the time. I was asked to talk to you about the university of the future, the university of 2030. And as we've been discussing earlier today, and as I hear was discussed last night, of course it is very, very difficult to say what is going to happen in the future. However, I'm going to stick my neck out this afternoon and predict two certain things. One is, and forgive me men in the audience, I do love men, but you do one thing which is very predictable, in that you love making toys. You love creating gizmos and tools and gadgets, and I think I am fair in saying that, whereas generally the female of the species has less interest in this. And tools are a very, very, very commercial optimum. Tools are always, always used. From the moment that man created the first jadeite hand axe that became the prestige object of the Stone Age, tools have been exchanged for money. And so, although much of the future is indeed immensely difficult to predict with any usefulness, however, where commercial purpose is to be the next big thing when it comes to technology, we do know what is coming in the future because already multi-million pounds have been invested to ensure the future's creation.